is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The EU's vaccine procurement strategy is under growing strain as some member states seek additional supplies outside the bloc.
U-turn in France. The AstraZeneca vaccine will now be offered to those aged over 65.
Spain and Germany both see rises in the number of people out of work as the pandemic effect takes hold.
The US joins the EU in announcing sanctions against senior Russian officials over the alleged poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
Freed after a 4-day ordeal, nearly 300 Nigerian schoolgirls abducted on Friday have been released. Denmark and Austria have formed an alliance with Israel to produce second-generation vaccines against mutations of the coronavirus. The move by the two EU member states comes amid rising frustrations over delays in ordering, approving and distributing vaccines that have left the 27-member bloc trailing far behind Israel's vaccination campaign. Well, let's talk now to Tony Waterman, who joins us live from Brussels. So, Tony, what reaction has there been from the Commission or member states to this move by Copenhagen and Vienna?
Well, Robin, Brussels has really been trying to downplay the significance of this vaccine alliance. The spokesperson for health saying that it's always a good idea to learn from the best practices from other countries, saying that the Commission would be eager to hear what lessons are learned in this partnership. Perhaps they could use that to beef up their own vaccine strategy. But this is really just the latest blow to the EU's vaccine strategy. And the Austrian Chancellor was quite stinging in his remarks, saying that Vienna can no longer depends solely on the EU for vaccines. As you mentioned, Israel is leading the world when it comes to inoculations. More than 52% of the population has now received at least one dose of a vaccine. But the Chief Commission spokesperson saying, you know, it's really difficult to compare a 450 million person population to Israel's 9 million. Take a listen.
You need to keep a sense of proportions in terms of the challenge that we face compared to one specific country. And secondly, the European Union is composed of 27 different member states, which have extremely different structures. Be it administrative, be it healthcare systems, be it population density, etc., etc. So it's not as if you can take one model and simply put it, stick it on the European Union and say this is what you should be doing.
So, Tony, where does all this leave the EU's vaccine procurement programme?
Well, it's in a pretty precarious position because now you have increasingly a number of member states looking outside the bloc for supplies at a time when Brussels is throwing tens of millions of additional funding towards ramping up production within the bloc and also for testing and genome sequencing of the variants. And what's increasingly looking like is going to happen is that these member states are going to turn to and favor whichever country can deliver those supplies first. So just yesterday, Poland had a conversation, the president of Poland had a conversation with the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, about potentially acquiring the Sinopharm vaccine, which is already in circulation in Hungary. The president there received his jab of Sinopharm over the weekend. Slovakia also received its first shipment of the Russian Sputnik vaccine yesterday. It's the first installment of 2 million dose order. So these countries are increasingly looking elsewhere. Their concern is that as these variants start to spread, that they need to ramp up capacity really quickly, turn on a dime essentially, and they're just not sure after this first performance from the EU if they're going to be able to do that.
And Tony, the WHO has been briefing on the rollout of COVAX, of course, the global initiative spearheaded by the European Commission and others for equitable access to vaccines. What do they have to say?
Well, there was additional deliveries that took place today to a number of countries within Africa, also in Asia and Cambodia. And they're saying that by the end of this week, 11 million doses will be delivered. 237 million doses expected to be delivered by the end of May to 142 different countries. This is a program that got off to a rather slow start. I mean, it's coming really 4 months behind these immunization programs. The first vaccines were rolled out across some Western countries. And the WHO head, Dr. Tedros, saying that the equitable distribution has not been exactly what he has been looking for. It's been much slower than he was hoping for, but that it would have been worse off if this COVAX facility wasn't improved at all. So the concentration now is getting these vaccines out, and also they're striking additional deals to secure more doses. Potentially, they said, 500 million additional doses for this year alone, also with companies like Novavax and AstraZeneca, where handling that vaccine is much easier than the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. It doesn't require that type of rigorous transport mechanism or storage. So the hope is that as these easier to handle vaccines become more readily available, that this program will really pick up pace so that the poorest nations and the developing nations of the world aren't left behind.
Tony, thank you. Tony Waterman there in Brussels.
Results of the UK's vaccine rollout show both the AstraZeneca and Pfizer jabs are more than 80% effective in preventing hospitalisations in the over 80s after just one shot. The data from Public Health England should prompt a reassessment of the AstraZeneca vaccine amongst European countries which had shunned it. A lack of trial data had prompted concern about its efficacy in older people.
And one of the countries to have made that U-turn is France. Authorities say they will now allow people under the age of 75 with existing health problems to receive the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, despite an earlier stance that the vaccine should be for the under 65s only. The reassessment is likely to help speed up the country's vaccination programme, which has been criticised for being too slow compared to other countries in the bloc. Ross Cullen is in Paris with more.
The French government had previously warned that the Anglo-Swedish company's vaccine may not be as safe and effective as other jabs, a viewpoint now clarified by the Health Secretary in a prime-time TV appearance on one of the main news shows here. Olivier Véran said the vaccine will now be administered in France to people up to 75 years of age who have a serious underlying health condition such as cancer, hypertension or diabetes. That means another 1.5 million people will therefore be eligible for AstraZeneca vaccines in France at family doctor clinics immediately and soon afterwards also at pharmacies. Those aged over 75 will still be offered either the Pfizer or the Moderna jabs. Until now, only health workers and the 2 million people in France aged between 50 and 64 who suffer from a comorbidity have been approved to receive the AstraZeneca shot. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is widely used across the United Kingdom, but several EU countries have expressed doubts over the efficacy of the vaccine when it comes to older people. The European Union regulator has approved it for all adults, but it is up to each member state to set its own particular rollout policy. France has millions of doses in stock waiting to be used, and the government wants to accelerate its coronavirus vaccination programme, which is one of the slowest in Europe. The French government is trying to speed up the rollout of jabs, but has so far only administered about 3 million shots, of which about half are second vaccinations. The French president paid his first visit to a vaccination centre on Monday, where he confirmed there will be no relaxation of the nationwide nightly 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew for at least another month until more people have been vaccinated. Extending the age range for those eligible to have the AstraZeneca vaccine should allow the government to reach 6 million first vaccinations this month. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
In the UK, the search continues for a person infected with a coronavirus variant first discovered in the Brazilian city of Manaus. This is despite appeals for the person who arrived in the UK in mid-February to get in touch after they failed to leave contact details. British and Brazilian scientists say the P1 variant is 1.4 to 2.2 times more transmissible than the previous versions found in Manaus and able to evade immunity built up from previous infections. Well, to get some perspective on the new AstraZeneca data showing good efficacy in the elderly and the P1 variant in the UK, I spoke with Dr. Julian Tang, a consultant virologist at the Leicester Royal Infirmary, who told me the new data was good news.
This is very encouraging on two separate fronts. One, that it shows this technology, this new technology, is actually very effective in real life. And two, that the clinical trials may actually underestimate the impact of some of these vaccines as well.
Some of our neighbours in continental Europe had shunned the AstraZeneca vaccine for older age groups. Were they wrong to do so? France now seems to think so.
Yes, of course, people are convinced by data, at least from one population, and the UK population is very similar to the European population. So I think all the vaccines, on all sides of the world have benefits. And I think we should be really careful about criticising them prematurely, like we've seen with the German and the Russian response to the AstraZeneca vaccine as well.
But could Oxford University and AstraZeneca have handled this better, seeing as it was a lack of trial data that seemed to scare off European countries? Was this rushed?
I don't think it was rushed per se. I think they tried to cover too many bases at the same time, and this is probably why the US FDA has not and may not actually approve the AstraZeneca vaccine for COVID at all. I think that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine trials that were done were very complicated. There are three different arms with three different combinations of placebo and different combinations of interval between first and second dosing in South Africa, Brazil, UK. So I think that they could have presented it in a much more simple way. But then ironically, later on, they had data for that separated first, second dose interval by up to 3 months, because they actually had that by design or accident in their trials, where some of the second dosing was delayed for 6 to 12 weeks in each of those arms. So they had some data, but they didn't have any data, didn't have enough data for the elderly or the BAME populations in those trials. And that was just extrapolated because, to be fair, if the vaccine's working well in the white population and the younger population, we expect it to have some effect on the BAME population and the elderly population. And that inference, that extrapolation, was not that unreasonable at the time that the MHRA made that decision to license the vaccine, despite the very mixed clinical trial design.
UK and Brazilian scientists are now saying how much more transmissible the P1 variant is. How much concern is there that it could be vaccine-proof?
So I think that all the vaccines may need to be upgraded to meet the 484K mutation that is present in the Brazilian P1, as well as the Brazilian P2, and also the South African strain variant, and also the Bristol variant and the Liverpool variant. Because that 484K mutation seems to be the main one that reduces the neutralizing capacity of vaccine-induced antibodies. So it reduces the efficacy of the vaccines overall by anything from 20 to 50%. And we'll see in time in Brazil when the vaccine rolls out, and South Africa as the vaccine rolls out there, what the actual impact is in real life. And we've seen some reinfections already documented in the Brazilian population against the P1 variants. And that may well be true against natural infection to previous viruses, and may well be true in vaccines designed on older viruses, the Wuhan virus strain in the current vaccine generation as well.
Coming up, we look at why the pandemic is pushing women out of work.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of a story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Some of the world's most respected public health figures are looking at the future implications of COVID-19. The aim is to discuss how the pandemic remains a threat to health, as well as the lessons learned on preventing and coping with future pandemics. The virtual event is called The Future of Health, and the message has been clear. Global cooperation is needed to move forward.
And CGTN's Naweed Jabarkil is following this for us now. So what's been discussed so far, Naweed?
Well, Paul, none of us are safe until we're all safe. That's the message we've been hearing quite a lot recently, and that's really the background for why the University of Edinburgh brought together some of the world's leading public health officials. Among them was Dr. Anthony Fauci, recently Joe Biden, the US president's new chief medical advisor. And he said, really, if you look at throughout history when people have been faced with these sorts of challenges like COVID-19 before, it's global cooperation and working together that's really proved effective. Have a listen.
If we do not completely suppress this, we will continue to be challenged by variants, which have a way of coming back to bite us, as they say. You know, we have been successful in the past by global cooperation with smallpox, with polio, with measles. There's no reason in the world why we cannot do the same thing with COVID-19.
This was also a rare opportunity to bring together two of the world's largest economies. It was in China when the coronavirus really captured the global attention last year when it started to spread in Wuhan. And it's in the US now, which is currently dealing with the deadliest outbreak of the disease. Vaccines have been a potential game changer, promising a lot of hope for many across the world, but it's one that's also been distributed fairly unequally. That's something that Dr. Zhong Nanshan, one of China's leading epidemiologists and respiratory experts, said needed to be addressed. Have a listen.
Some of the poor countries, the low-income countries, they have no vaccine. We have to join the WHO COVAX plan, and then to have the better and equitable allocation of the vaccine, in particular to those countries who cannot afford vaccine.
Naweed, will anything actually happen after this virtual meeting?
Well, this event does show that some of the world's leading scientists are on the same page when it comes to how to deal with the virus. But the pandemic, of course, is raging on. Vaccine diplomacy is becoming more of a concern. And if that's to be addressed, I think there's going to be a lot of political will required. And that's going to be a lot more challenging, if you like, Paul. If you look at what's happened so far, we've seen governments all across the world prioritize their national interests, whether it's closing borders, whether it's snapping up some of those vaccines. Wealthier nations snapping up almost 75% of the world's vaccine supplies. But I think moving forward, one thing that Zhong Nanshan did highlight was that he said he welcomed Joe Biden's recent decision to bring the US back into the World Health Organization. And I think one thing that the COVID-19 pandemic could prove really is the future value and effectiveness and worth, if you like, of institutions like the World Health Organization. This is, many people agree, the toughest challenge the world has faced since the Second World War. And it's going to require multilateralism. It's going to require countries working together, and it could prove actually in the long run a chance for the world to try and improve global cooperation if it's going to work together to try and defeat COVID-19. Paul.
Naweed Jabarkil in London, many thanks.
German unemployment unexpectedly rose in February for the first time since last June. The shutdown is set to expire this weekend, but leaked proposals seen on Tuesday indicate that it will likely carry on until the end of the month. Ryan Thompson has more from Frankfurt.
It's been far from business as usual here in Germany since mid-December. Major chunks of the economy remain at a standstill because of coronavirus restrictions. But despite all of that, the nation's unemployment figures appear relatively untouched in February and have weathered the second wave well. The jobless rate was unchanged from January at 6.3%, with just shy of 3 million people registered as unemployed. But this does not account for the millions who are at home, unable to actually go to work because of lockdown restrictions on retail shops, restaurants, and other service sectors. Short-term work schemes from the federal government have kept some of them on their employers' payrolls, and in some cases with only a little bit of a dent in their take-home pay. That's still done little to help retailers actually survive this crisis. German retail sales tumbled far more than expected in January. And when I say far more, it is quite significant, more than 4% higher than the 0.3% that economists had predicted. Now, good news is not expected for retailers anytime soon. Shops will remain shut until infections decrease significantly. Germany's 16 state premiers are meeting with the Chancellor Angela Merkel on Wednesday to discuss a path out of lockdown. But according to leaked documents, it is likely that this shutdown will be extended until the end of the month. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Spain has registered its highest jobless level in 5 years. Unemployment has risen to just over 4 million, a level last seen in 2016. Restrictions following a third wave of the coronavirus pandemic led to an additional 45,000 jobless claims in February. Over 900,000 people are currently being supported by the government's furlough scheme.
The Brexit exodus from the City of London is slowing, according to new data. Consultancy firm EY says an initial rush of London-based financial firms opening hubs in the EU has now subsided. The report says job hires and asset moves have been lower than forecast, but it warns that over the long term, Brexit will continue to fragment European financial services, which will benefit the US and Asia. Employees of the French water and services giant Suez are protesting against a planned bid from rival company Veolia. Suez's directors have reportedly rejected an offer for around 70% of the business. Suez's boss says the takeover would be irrational and destructive for France. Zoom has posted strong fourth-quarter results, with sales surging 369% compared to a year earlier. The ongoing pandemic means more people have used the video conferencing platform for socializing and working. The company's founder says he expects growth to continue this year. Volvo says it will only sell electric cars by 2030, phasing out both combustion engines and hybrids. It's the latest auto company to respond to government pressure and consumer demand for electric vehicles. Volvo's chief technology officer says there's no future for combustion engines on the road. Swiss chocolate maker Lindt & Sprüngli saw net profit fall over 37% to just shy of $350 million for 2020. The chocolatier, famous for its gold-wrapped bunnies, said the pandemic had made for a difficult year, but that it was aiming for 6 to 8% sales growth in 2021. The company had some success with online sales and says it's reached its goal of responsibly sourcing 100% of its cocoa beans.
Europe's biggest banks could face new rules to disclose how much they contribute to climate change. A green asset ratio is being proposed as a key metric to show if a firm is shifting away from financing fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. Well, Alpesh Patel from the private equity house Profinium Partners joins us now. Thank you very much indeed. Could you tell us a little bit more about this proposal and how you think it could work?
Well, the European Banking Authority has only put the proposal forward. There's not a lot of detail at the moment. It's really going to measure, in terms of the total assets that a bank has on its balance sheet against which it's lent money, how many of those are basically green finance and, of course, or climate-friendly, say, loans, advances, other kind of debts that they might have issued. So it is early days at the moment, how it will be measured, how it will be valued. But it's an exciting move. And, of course, after the financial credit crunch in 2007, this whole idea of having asset ratios over banks has clearly caught on.
So really exciting, really positive. But can banks make it work without harming their business model?
Well, I suspect they will find a way. When have you known bankers to knowingly not make a profit unless they get shocked by the financial crisis? And of course, it comes off the back of what Citibank's new CEO, Jane Fraser, said yesterday, that they're going to make their bank net neutral, net carbon neutral. So they clearly think that you can make profits as well as have this broader purpose. And of course, JP Morgan have said they're going to commit to investing $200 billion by 2025 to finance clean energy. BNP Paribas have said they're going to stop investing in companies that make more than 10% of their revenues from, say, coal mining, as well follows on the back of Societe Generale having a similar remit. Wells Fargo have also done a similar thing where they've said they're going to heavily invest in renewable energy. So you're seeing this massive coordinated shift. Well, I say coordinated, maybe coincidental shift, but certainly in the right direction amongst all these banks. And if they're all doing it, then it would suggest that the business model will work and they'll find ways of doing it.
Does it go far enough, though?
In and of itself, of course not. Given the size and scale of the problem, and most famously and most recently, Bill Gates has highlighted this climate change problem, it's going to almost certainly require United Nations involvement. It's possibly going to require legislation from domestic governments as well. And don't forget, this was just the EU. What about non-EU banks? What about American banks? I've mentioned Citibank already, and they all seem to be, like JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, going in the right direction, but there's a heck of a lot more to follow. So it's a good start. It definitely signals it's the direction of travel, and you'd loathe to be either in banking or any other industry and say, oh, we're not getting with the program. I think it means a lot of boards from right across all industries will be looking at this and saying, we need to be on the same agenda, and that's really the important signal of it. It's that leadership to get others to copy, because quite frankly, you're almost ashamed not to copy in this direction.
Right, and Alpesh, you mentioned the American banks. Should this be adopted really worldwide with binding legislation to really make it effective?
I think it's going to be necessary to do that. We've seen that the carrot approach alone, whilst good, and of course you'll remember carbon credits, 30, 40 years ago when they were invented, were supposed to be the problem with the ozone layer and stop global warming. Well, it didn't really work out like that. So I think it's going to be partly making sure the incentivization method is correct and efficient, and constantly being improved, but also there will need to be legislation. Obviously, some governments have already initiated that legislation and said this is what we absolutely have to do to sort of bind themselves, because it's very easy to try and get away from it. But it only needs a financial crisis for them to have an out and an exit and say, well, except in exceptional circumstances, and that's always the worry.
Alpesh Patel, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you with us.
Progress in gender equality in the workplace could be back at 2017 levels by the end of this year as a result of the pandemic. That's according to PwC's annual Women in Work Index, which measures female economic empowerment across 33 OECD countries. Well, Juliet Mann is here to tell us more. Juliet.
Thanks, Robin. Well, the pandemic has reversed the trend that we've been seeing over the past 9 years in OECD countries, which was consistent gains towards women's economic empowerment. And getting back to where we were means doubling efforts. Now, due to COVID-19, the Women in Work Index is predicted to fall 2.1 points. And it's not going to begin to recover until 2022. And that's not going to be about 0.8 points. But to undo the damage that's been caused by COVID-19 to women, progress towards gender equality in the next decade needs to be twice as fast as the historical rate. Take a look at this. Now, women are more affected by job losses than men. In 17 out of the 24 OECD countries that reported increased unemployment in 2020. And why is that? Well, women are around a third more likely to work in a sector that was completely shut down during the national lockdowns around the world, much more so than men. The industries like accommodation, food services, arts, entertainment. Now, although jobs will return when economies bounce back, they might not necessarily be the same jobs. So we're not just talking about gender equality here, but economic growth. Now, look at the index here, that the top 3 countries were Iceland at number 1, Sweden number 2, New Zealand at number 3. I think the UK was about number 16, and that was in 2019. If female employment rates across the OECD increased to match those of number 2, Sweden, it could boost OECD GDP by more than $6 trillion. So So it's really a wake-up call to governments, to policymakers and to businesses, highlighting the responsibility they have to work together.
Juliet, thank you. A Chinese academic is recovering after being the victim of an apparent racist attack in the English city of Southampton. Chinese national Peng Wang, who lectures in financial management at the city's university, was attacked by 4 men as he was out jogging. Mr. Wang, who's lived in Southampton for 6 years, is recovering. But he says he believes the combination of Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic is making life in the UK more dangerous for minorities. For more, go to our website at europe.cgtn.com. And remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
And still ahead here on CGTN, ASEAN members remain divided over the escalating crisis in Myanmar as Indonesia and Singapore call for the immediate release of Aung San Suu Kyi.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first 2 epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, make you last curve.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The EU's vaccine procurement strategy is under growing strain as some member states bypass the bloc to boost supplies. The AstraZeneca vaccine will now be offered to those over 65 years old after a U-turn in France. And Spain and Germany both see rising unemployment as the pandemic effect takes hold.
The United States has imposed sanctions against Russian officials and businesses over the attempted murder and jailing of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The Biden administration coordinated the move with the European Union. The Kremlin has warned it will respond in kind.
When all those who treated him thoroughly hide all the facts, which could help to understand what happened, and in parallel, when instead of the honest collaboration and not hiding, they start to punish us, this doesn't bring any credit to those who take decisions, and we will surely respond.
For more, Jim Spellman joins us from Maryland. So, Jim, Biden promised to be tougher on Russia. What more do we know about the sanctions?
A senior administration official briefed reporters this morning on these sanctions that target individuals in the Russian government as well as entities in Russia over what the U.S. intelligence apparatus claims was a Russian attempt to murder Alexei Navalny using a nerve agent. Russia, of course, as you heard, denies those claims. The sanctions will apply to 7 members of the Russian government. It will bar them from accessing any assets they may have in U.S. financial institutions. Also, there will be export controls placed on several entities that are involved in creating biological agents, including a Russian research facility. And that senior administration official reiterating Joe Biden's calls for Russia to release Navalny from prison. Paul?
Joe Biden seems to be taking a rather different position to Donald Trump, doesn't he?
Yeah, taking a much harder stance here against Russia, which is an easy political thing for Joe Biden to do here since Donald Trump was so often aligned with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. It comes as a time when Biden is being criticized for apparently going easy on Saudi Arabia over U.S. claims that the Crown Prince was behind the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. So perhaps this is a good subject change as well. The senior administration official that spoke with reporters today also stressing that this moves the Biden administration more in line with the European Union. This matches sanctions put in place in the autumn by the EU. And that's part of Joe Biden's larger move to reestablish and reaffirm ties with U.S. traditional U.S. allies around the world. Both the incident in Saudi Arabia and the ongoing situation with Navalny began under the Donald Trump presidency. I think a big question here is going to be how Joe Biden deals with any retaliation from Moscow regarding this and how he may address new incidents that may come up that challenge these relationships. These are relatively easy political moves for Joe Biden to take here, and largely the sanctions against these Russian officials are symbolic. So what's going to be very interesting is to see how this relationship evolves going forward. Is that administration official today telling reporters that this is not part of a larger reset with Russia, but clearly it is a different approach. Paul?
Jim Spellman in Bethesda, many thanks.
China says it's discussing a visit to Xinjiang by United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet. The country's delegate to the UNHCR has stressed that Bachelet should not set out with the aim of condemning its policies.
The door to Xinjiang is always open, and we welcome the High Commissioner to visit Xinjiang. Communication is kept up between the two sides, but the aim of the visit is to provide exchanges and cooperation rather than the so-called investigation based on guilty before proven.
ASEAN foreign ministers have held a special virtual meeting about the situation in Myanmar. It comes following the military takeover a month ago. Ryan Meltzer reports from Kuala Lumpur.
It takes a lot to get ASEAN to push the limits of its doctrine of non-interference in the other members' domestic affairs. But the bloody crackdown in Myanmar was just such a catalyst. Cambodia, Thailand and the Philippines initially said the military takeover in Myanmar was an internal matter. But Indonesia and Malaysia pushed for this special meeting. Ahead of the meeting, Malaysia's foreign minister said ASEAN had to act to show it was a cohesive group, while Singapore's foreign minister said events in Myanmar threatened the stability of the entire region.
We call on the Myanmar military authorities to exercise the utmost restraint, to desist from the use of lethal force, and to take immediate steps to de-escalate the situation in order to prevent further bloodshed, violence, and death.
ASEAN ministers heard from the Myanmar military representative. Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia called on Myanmar's military to release Aung San Suu Kyi and other detained leaders, start a political dialogue, and immediately halt the use of deadly force. Reports indicate that several other ASEAN members opposed those calls, arguing that Myanmar should be allowed to sort out the crisis without ASEAN intervention.
with some countries advocating more proactive actions and some countries emphasizing the traditional non-interference approach of ASEAN. Of course, it is very difficult to go beyond very strong words of condemnation.
In the end, the members' joint statement called only for all parties to exercise restraint, avoid instigating violence, and seek peaceful resolution through dialogue. Some in Myanmar have criticized ASEAN for even engaging with the military, saying it lends legitimacy to the military takeover. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
A group of nearly 300 girls who were kidnapped by gunmen in northwestern Nigeria last week have been released. Dozens of the girls were seen gathered at a government building in Zamfara. Most of them appeared to be unharmed, but at least a dozen were sent to hospital for treatment.
Well, joining me live now from the capital, Abuja, is Phil Ihaza. So, Phil, what more do we know about how the girls were found?
Well, thank you. At the moment, we don't have the exact details of how these girls were found, but according to the governor of Zamfara State, that's Bello Matawalle, he says that these girls were released unharmed and that it was thanks to quite a rigorous sessions of discussions, talks with the suspected criminals. And he says that that was made possible by some of the repentant criminals who had accepted the peace deal, the amnesty program that was initiated by the governor himself. And so this was how that the girls were released. He also stated emphatically that no ransom was paid to any of the criminals, and he assured that this will be the last of attacks on the state. He also says that the girls are fine, that they're going to be going through several checks in the hospitals, and of course they'll be reunited to their families. So indeed, it's 4 days of agony and grief and pain and uncertainties over in Nigeria, of course, in northern Nigeria.
The question's now turning to who is behind the abduction and what is the government doing to prevent further attacks like these happening in the future?
Well, at the moment, the governor or the government has not, mentioned any of the criminals, the groups or individuals involved, as well as no group has come out to claim responsibility for this latest abductions. But at the moment, the president, that's President Muhammadu Buhari, has declared Zamfara a no-fly zone, which means that some kind of intense security operations or activities will be ongoing in the state to forestall further attacks, and as well as to try to fish out these criminals, because there's been a lot of critics and security experts are saying until the government can name and shame some of these criminals involved in these crimes, we might see further attacks on maybe not that state but other states where there are potential criminals. And so that's what the government is trying to do at the moment, to flood the state with security operatives from the military, the police and other sister agencies to see how they can fish out these criminals and name and shame them, perpetrate them, bring them to book, and of course forestall further attacks. The schools in the state have also been closed down for now, especially the boarding facilities, and the government is trying to strengthen its security around schools and of course other soft targets.
Phil, good to talk to you. Phil Ihaza there, live in Abuja.
An American father and son have been handed over to Japanese authorities for allegedly helping former Nissan boss Carl Ghosn flee the country. Michael Taylor, seen here on the left, and Peter Taylor have fought a months-long battle to avoid extradition. The pair were charged last year with helping Ghosn flee to Lebanon, hidden in a box on a private jet. He faces charges of financial misconduct. 50,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine have arrived in Iraq. The first shipment was donated by China with around 2 million doses on order. Jabs began on Tuesday with health workers, the elderly and security forces first in line. The United Nations Secretary-General says cutting aid to Yemen is a death sentence. It comes after a pledging conference raised $1.7 billion, less than half the target amount. The UN says Yemen is experiencing the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with 16 million people going hungry. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the UK and Ireland should bid to host the 2030 Soccer World Cup. A British newspaper reports the UK Chancellor will set aside almost $4 million to promote a World Cup bid when he unveils his budget on Wednesday. An Indonesian volcano has erupted, spewing hot ash 3 kilometres into the sky. It's the first blast at Mount Sinabung in northern Sumatra province since last August. No casualties have been reported. Authorities have warned of further eruptions. And the International Energy Agency says global carbon emissions fell nearly 6% last year as economic activity stalled during the pandemic. But emissions rebounded sharply at the end of the year and are on course to rise further. The agency says not enough is being done to switch to clean energy.
Several major cities in China are conducting pilot tests for a digital currency. Tens of millions of yuan were issued through lotteries during the past Lunar New Year holiday to residents in Beijing and Chengdu. Now Shanghai is looking to expand the test. Zhong Shexuan reports.
With service in more than 4 million stores across China, Shanghai-based digital solutions provider Shou Qianba has just started its trial of digital yuan payments in a large fashion chain store in Shenzhen. The company says it's actively preparing to use the digital currency.
We are working with licensed payment organizations and banks that are qualified to deal with the digital renminbi, so we can accept the digital currency standard. Currently, there are only a few banks and organizations in trial areas that are qualified to do so, but we want to help our vendors enhance their ability to handle the digital currency in trial areas.
The company now serves 32 million consumers a day. But the key to the promotion of the digital currency largely lies in how many people can actually have access to using it. And the trials are still limited. Chengdu issued 200,000 digital red envelopes at the end of last month, making the western city the fourth to issue digital currency. Experts say that although it's a breakthrough from technology to a real application, digital yuan payments are still far from being mature enough to be accepted by the wider public.
During the last Double 11 shopping festival, the transaction numbers per second on Alipay reached a peak of 580,000, and the combined transaction numbers per second on UnionPay and NetsUnion topped 100,000. But according to the upper limit of the digital currency globally, it's designed to handle around only 50,000 transactions per second. So, though theoretically China's digital renminbi is based on blockchain technology, which is safe and reliable, in practice there are still bottlenecks in the network and computer technologies.
Professor Yan says application of digital currency payments will continue on trial in large commercial centers. It will remain limited for the sake of risk prevention. Once the technology matures, however, it's likely we'll all be seeing a lot more of the digital yuan. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
You're watching Global Business Europe. Coming up, a gathering of minds to make our oceans sustainable. We'll tell you how.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
NPC and CPPCC, China's biggest annual political gathering of lawmakers and political advisors. As the world's second largest economy recovers from the pandemic, it chalks out plans for the coming year and beyond. With new proposals, laws, and targets, CGTN brings you unmatched coverage of the meetings that matter. Exclusive interviews, people's voices, in-depth analysis, and the impact on the rest of the world. China's 2 sessions begins March 4th. Live and exclusive on CGTN.
Hi there, welcome back. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of the environment. This week, the focus turns to the planet's oceans, with a virtual summit looking at how to minimise human impact while financing a sustainable economy. Policymakers, big business, scientists and entrepreneurs from over 100 countries are addressing key issues, including one we're all familiar with, plastic pollution. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, over 300 million tonnes of plastic are produced every year. At least 12 million tonnes ends up in the ocean, making up 80% of all marine debris. But plastic isn't the only problem. The shipping industry produces more carbon emissions than most countries, while also polluting our waters. Over 90% of world trade is carried across oceans by some 90,000 vessels. To put that into perspective, Oceana says if global shipping were a country, it would be the 6th largest producer of greenhouse gases. And the Worldwide Fund for Nature says overfishing is one of the most significant drivers of declines in ocean wildlife populations. Globally, the number of overfished stock has tripled in half a century. Warming seas and ocean acidification are exacerbating the problem.
I've been speaking to Minna Epps, who's the director of the Global Marine and Polar Programme at the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
I think there's been a very big increase in awareness about the importance of the ocean, not only its benefits and function, but also the importance of stabilizing our climate. And recently also realizing that it's worth trillions. So I think if the ocean was its own state, it would be the 7th largest economy. So there's been a huge investment also in marine industry. So that's a huge potential there.
The summit wants to create a sustainable ocean economy. What would that look like?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about sustainable ocean economy, it's basically the concept of blue economy. So the blue economy basically look at the ocean as a potential economic potential while conserving or meeting the conservation needs. So we might look to the ocean as potential solutions, whether it's for clean energy, etc. We've been talking about decarbonization, restoring marine ecosystems, and also potentially growing aquaculture to meet food security needs. However, all of this really needs to be underpinned and make sure it's done sustainably. And by doing that, you actually have to make sure that there's no biodiversity trade-offs and that this can so you can have a healthy ocean and a healthy economy.
So what are the key areas that need change?
Well, first of all, we need to protect and restore our marine ecosystems. And there is a global push that we need to actually protect 30% of the ocean. That is one crucial. There is a big political commitment and will to ensure this. And as I said, also looking at the potential in terms of growth, we really need to make sure that it has the right enabling conditions. And I really think that financial institutions, they have the power to accelerate and to actually mainstream ocean-based industry. But the main focus should really be on making sure it's done sustainably.
And how important is it to have an international strategy on all this?
Well, I think it's a global effort. 66% of our planet is actually, it's actually the ocean space. So I think that, we need to have global efforts. And if you look at the areas beyond national jurisdiction, that's a huge area. So we need to collaborate jointly because it's a common heritage that we have that we owe it to protect. So I would probably change the narrative and say it's not saving our ocean, the ocean will save us, but we need to collaborate at all levels, the global level, but also between different actors, and even within the same sector in a kind of pre-competitive way. So global collaboration is absolutely key, having global targets and making sure there is a transparent way of tracking progress towards these.
Volunteers in Italy's southern Puglia region are using an olive crisis as an ecological opportunity. For 10 years, the spread of a bacteria has decimated olive production, causing major economic losses while dramatically changing the landscape. But a group is hoping to restore the region's rich biodiversity, which was lost when olive trees took over more than a century ago. Lincoln van der Westhuizen reports.
The olive groves of southeast Italy, with their gnarled trunks and shimmering foliage, have defined the landscape for generations. However, an untreatable bacteria is wiping out the crop on which the local economy of Puglia depends. Nevertheless, some see the demise of the olive trees as an opportunity to create a new balance in the environment and restore the rich biodiversity lost to the olive oil trade more than a century ago. In Salento, near the tip of Italy's heel, one group is working to reintroduce vegetable gardens and mixed forests to the area. Rita Cogli is a botanist working with the Manu Manu Riforista volunteer body.
Manu Manu Riforista seeks precisely this kind of restoration between the agrarian artificial ecosystem and natural ecosystem. In other words, natural areas alongside cultivated areas, where there is no conflict.
Dove però non c'è conflitto.
Italian olive production has decreased almost 10% since the disease arrived. In the Salento area alone, losses are as high as $1 billion. Manu Manu Riforista hopes to chart a new course. The association began its activities by buying seed parcels through crowdfunding and planting in a plot loaned to it by a farm. Volunteers have been working hand in hand with locals.
We were constantly telling people what we were doing, and this had an enormous impact. It was as if everyone was just waiting for the chance to replant.
Biologist Leonardo Beccarisi collaborates with the association.
La questione qui non è forestare, la questione è
The question here isn't just reforestation, it's about doing it well. It's not enough to just plant trees, you have to keep monitoring
è
them.
necessario di ripristinare degli habitat.
Olive trees brought great wealth to Salento, but now there is a chance to build something more enriching. A more sustainable, biologically diverse future is on the horizon, as long as organizations like Manu Manu Riforista continue to thrive and prosper.
That was Lincoln van der Westhuizen reporting. Here, the UK street artist Banksy may have struck again, this time after scaling the walls of a derelict prison in the dead of night. A painting showing a prisoner escaping using bedsheets tied to a typewriter appeared overnight in Reading. It's not yet been claimed by the artist. There's been an ongoing campaign to turn the former jail into an arts centre rather than housing. The prison's most famous inmate was the playwright Oscar Wilde, who was imprisoned in 1895 for the then crime of gross indecency.
And the headlines again. The EU's vaccine procurement strategy is under growing strain as some member states seek additional supplies outside the bloc. The AstraZeneca vaccine will now be offered to those aged over 65 after a U-turn in France. And Spain and Germany both see rising unemployment as the pandemic effect takes hold.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks very much for watching. There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And we're available to watch on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well, of course, at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. And from all the team here in London, goodbye.